The first thing I noticed about the Whitlock dining room was that it did not smell like food. It smelled like money, like beeswax polish and old flowers and something floral and cold that I would later learn was just the smell of air conditioning moving through a house too large to ever be warm. I stood beside the table in a green dress I had saved for 4 months to buy, and I smiled, because Julian had told me, in the car, squeezing my hand until my knuckles ached pleasantly, that tonight was the night. Tonight his family would finally meet me. Tonight I would stop being his secret. I did not know yet that I would spend the next hour as exactly that, a secret standing in plain sight, wearing pearls that Julian's mother would soon accuse me of stealing from a drawer I had never touched. The table was long enough to seat 14, though only 6 places had been set. White linen, so crisp it looked like it could cut skin. Silver polished to a mirror shine, each fork laid with the precision of a surgical tool. Candles in crystal holders that threw small orange suns onto the ceiling. Behind the head of the table hung a portrait of a man with Julian's jaw and none of his warmth. His grandfather, I would learn, the one who built the first Whitlock Hotel with hands that, according to family legend, never touched a broom again after it opened. I had grown up around rooms like this one, not living in them, serving in them. My mother cleaned houses in the good part of town before her knees gave out, and I spent my teenage years catering weddings and charity dinners, carrying trays past people who looked through me like I was made of the same air as the chandeliers. I knew how to hold my spine straight in a room built to make you feel small. I did not know, that night, that I would need every year of that practice. Julian's mother, Beatrice Whitlock, entered first. She wore ivory silk and an expression that suggested she had already decided the evening was beneath her before it began. Her eyes moved over me once, twice, the way you might glance at a stain on a tablecloth you intend to have removed. "Julian," she said, not to me, as if I were furniture that happened to be standing in her eyeline. "Why is the maid wearing my pearls?" I laughed. I actually laughed, because for one absurd second I thought it was a joke, the kind rich families make about each other at holidays, some private reference I hadn't been let in on yet. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to laugh too, to say, "Mother, stop. This is Noelle. I told you about her." But Julian's hand, which had been resting warm and certain at the small of my back, the entire walk from the car, was no longer there. I felt it leave before I understood why. "She's," Julian said, and stopped. His eyes flicked to his mother, to the second brother-in-law already seated with his phone half hidden beneath the table edge, to an aunt I hadn't been introduced to who was watching with the frank, hungry interest of someone who loves a scene. "She's helping with the dinner tonight, just for this evening. I hired her through the agency." The agency? I stood there in my green dress, the one with the small covered buttons up the back that I'd asked Amara to help me fasten an hour earlier. Buttons Julian's own fingers had undone slower just 3 nights ago in my apartment, while he told me I was the only good thing that had ever happened to him, and I listened to him call me an agency hire. "She's not dressed like staff," Beatrice said, tilting her head, examining me now, the way you'd examine a piece of furniture delivered to the wrong address. "Pearls, that dress. Rather presumptuous for a temp." "I told her to dress nicely," Julian said. Each word came faster than the last, the particular cowardice of a man building a lie in real time, adding bricks before the mortar has set. "For the ambiance. I didn't want the help to look like help tonight. I wanted everything to be perfect." "The help," he said it twice now. Each time it landed somewhere new in my chest, a small, precise wound, like the doctor pressing a finger into skin to test where it hurts. I did not correct him. I want to be honest with you about that, because I have turned it over so many times since. I did not correct him. I stood there, green dress, borrowed pearls that were in fact my own grandmother's, my throat closing around a truth that suddenly felt too enormous and too humiliating to say out loud, in a room full of strangers who had already decided who I was. If I said I'm his girlfriend, he's lying, and Julian did not immediately agree, and some cold, sinking part of me already knew he would not. Then I would be worse than staff. I would be a delusional woman making a scene at a stranger's table. I would be an embarrassment with nowhere to go. So I did the thing that women like me are trained to do since childhood. I made myself smaller. I stepped back from the table, found a spot near the sideboard where the real caterers stood with their trays of untouched canapes, and I folded my hands in front of me, the way I had 1,000 times at weddings that weren't mine, funerals that weren't mine, birthdays that weren't mine. I watched the family sit. I watched Julian take his seat at his father's right hand, the place of the favored son, and I watched him not look at me, not once. He picked up his water glass and drank like a man trying to wash something down. The real caterers, a young man named Desmond and an older woman whose name I never learned, glanced at me sideways, confused, because they knew I wasn't one of them, and too professional to say so out loud. One of them, kindly, quietly, slid a chair a few inches toward me, an unspoken invitation to at least stand somewhere less exposed. I didn't take it. I don't know why. Maybe some stubborn piece of me refused to accept comfort from a lie's shadow. Soup was served, a pale, elegant thing with a swirl of cream and a single edible flower on top, and I watched Julian's family eat it, while I stood 12 feet away with my stomach in knots and my throat burning with the effort of not crying in front of people who had decided I did not deserve tears, only usefulness. "Where did you find her exactly?" the aunt asked, delighted. "She's very pretty for domestic work." "The agency does a good job vetting," Julian said, and reached for the bread. I have replayed that sentence more times than any other in my life. The agency does a good job vetting. 9 months of him memorizing how I take my coffee, 9 months of his hands in my hair at 2 in the morning, telling me I was different from every woman before me, and here, in front of the people whose opinion he apparently valued more than my heart, I was a line item. A vetted expense. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. The soup bowls had just been cleared when the door at the far end of the dining room opened, and something in the air changed before I even saw who it was. I noticed the shift in the room first, the way Beatrice's spine straightened a half-inch, the way the aunt's laughter died mid-syllable, the way Julian's father set down his fork with a care that looked almost like fear. Then I saw her. She was tall, dressed in deep wine-colored silk that moved like water when she walked, dark hair pulled back with a severity that should have looked harsh, and instead looked like armor, like a woman who had decided a long time ago that softness was a luxury she couldn't afford at this particular table. She moved into the room the way certain people move into rooms. Not fast, not announcing herself, just simply arriving, and having the room rearrange itself around the fact of her. This was Cordelia. I knew it before anyone said her name, because Julian had mentioned her exactly twice in 9 months, both times with the particular flatness of a man discussing an weather system he couldn't control. "My sister runs the company. My sister doesn't really do family dinners. She's always working. My sister isn't warm. Don't take it personally if she's short with you." She did not look short with anyone. She looked like a woman taking inventory. Her eyes moved once around the table. Her mother, her father, her brother, the aunt, the empty soup bowls. And then they found me, standing by the sideboard in a green dress with covered buttons, hands folded, face carefully arranged into the calm blankness I had perfected over a decade of rooms like this one. She did not look away. I felt that look land on me differently than every other look that night had. Beatrice had looked at me like a stain. The aunt had looked at me like entertainment. Julian had, by the end, stopped looking at me altogether. Cordelia looked at me the way you look at something you are trying to solve. Her eyes went from my dress, good enough to be new, not couture, the kind of dress a woman buys for a special night and saves for months to afford, to my hands, folded too carefully, to my face, and I watched something in her expression sharpen into focus. "Julian," she said. Her voice was quiet. That was the first thing that surprised me. I had expected, from the way the room had gone still, someone loud. Instead, she was quiet in the particular way that makes everyone else stop talking just to hear her. "Who is this?" "She's with the catering agency," Julian said, too quickly. "Is she?" Cordelia did not sit down. She stood at the head of the table where her father's chair was, one hand resting lightly on its back, and studied me for a long moment that felt like it lasted an hour. What agency? I don't... Mother booked it. Beatrice's mouth thinned. I most certainly did not book anyone. Julian said he was bringing someone tonight. The silence that followed had a texture to it, a thickness, like the air before a storm breaks. I watched Julian's face do something complicated. Panic dressed up as confusion. The particular scrambling of a man who has told two different lies to two different people and just watched them collide in real time. I hired her myself then, he said, through an app, for tonight only. An app? Cordelia repeated. 2 words, and somehow they contained more contempt than an hour of Beatrice's sighing. What's your name? She was asking me, directly. For the first time all evening, someone at that table was speaking to me as though I were a person capable of answering for myself. Noelle, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Noelle Carter. And what agency do you work for, Noelle Carter? I looked at Julian. I gave him one more chance. I don't know why. Some small, stupid ember of hope that he would finally do the brave thing, to look at his sister and say she doesn't work for anyone. She's mine. I love her. I was a coward and I'm sorry. He looked at his water glass instead. I don't work for an agency, I said, and my voice shook now, just slightly, on the last word. I'm a pastry chef. I co-own a bakery. I'm Julian's girlfriend. We've been together almost a year. The words landed in that room like a dropped plate. I heard the aunt's sharp inhale. I saw Beatrice's face go through several expressions in rapid succession, none of them kind. And I watched Julian close his eyes, just briefly, the exact expression of a man who has been caught not in infidelity, but in something he apparently considered worse, being seen loving someone his family hadn't approved first. Julian, Cordelia said, and her voice had not risen at all, which somehow made it more frightening than shouting would have been. You told your family your girlfriend was hired help. It's complicated, Cordelia. You don't understand I understand perfectly. She had not looked away from me once during this exchange. Now she did, finally, turning her full attention to her brother, and I watched 30 years of some old, exhausted sibling knowledge pass across her face. You panicked. You've always panicked. When we were children, you told our parents I'd broken the greenhouse window so you wouldn't be blamed for something you'd done for love of a girl at school, and you're still doing it. Except this time, the girl is standing in the room, and she's an adult, and she just told the truth in front of everyone while you sat there and let her. That's not. Stand up, Cordelia said. Julian blinked. What? Stand up, out of your chair. Cordelia, this is absurd. I'm not going to. Stand up, Julian. Her voice did not rise. It simply became, somehow, the only sound in the room, the only thing anyone could possibly do anything but obey. You lied about a woman who loves you in front of the people who are supposed to love you both. You made her stand at that sideboard through an entire course, while you ate soup 12 feet away and called her the help. You do not get to sit at this table tonight. Julian looked to his mother, some old instinct for a parent to intervene on his behalf. Beatrice, for once in her life, said nothing at all. Perhaps even she understood. There was no version of this where she could defend him without indicting herself. Julian stood, slowly, red-faced, the particular humiliation of a grown man being disciplined at his own family's table. Cordelia turned to me. Come sit down, she said. Please. I did not move at first. I think some part of me was waiting for the catch, the joke, the moment where this too would reveal itself as another kind of cruelty, dressed up prettier. But her eyes stayed steady on mine, and there was nothing performative in them, nothing that asked me to be grateful. I don't need charity, I said, quieter than I meant to. This isn't charity. Something moved behind her eyes, not softness exactly, but the ghost of it, the shape a softer woman might have made if she'd been allowed to grow up into one. A woman my brother is too cowardly to name, deserves his seat more than he does. Sit down, Noelle. Eat something. You've been standing in that dress for an hour while my family ate without you, and I am ashamed of every one of us for it. I walked to Julian's abandoned chair. The wood was still warm from where he'd sat, and there was something almost unbearably strange about lowering myself into that warmth, into the seat of the man who had spent the evening erasing me, while his entire family watched in a silence so complete I could hear the candles flickering. Cordelia did not sit at the head of the table where her father presided. She pulled out the chair beside mine, Julian's old seat, now vacant on the other side, creating an odd little island of empty space where he'd stood exiled from his own dinner. And she sat down next to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Bring out the next course," she said to Desmond, who nodded and vanished toward the kitchen with visible relief. Beatrice found her voice first. "Cordelia, you cannot simply rearrange my table because—" "I can, and I have," Cordelia said, without heat, buttering a piece of bread as though nothing at all unusual had occurred. "You'll get used to it." I don't remember much of what was actually served for the rest of that dinner. I remember the roasted duck arriving and not tasting it, my hands shaking too hard to properly hold the fork Cordelia had quietly turned right side up for me when I'd picked up the wrong one in my daze. I remember Julian standing near the doorway for almost the entire remaining course, not invited back to the table, not brave enough to leave, caught in some purgatory of his own making. I remember Beatrice's aunt whispering something behind her napkin to no one in particular, and I remember Cordelia's hand, once, briefly, resting near mine on the white tablecloth, not touching, just near, a kind of silent proof that I was not, in fact, invisible. When the dinner finally, mercifully ended, I stood to leave, and my legs nearly gave out from an entire evening of held breath, finally releasing at once. "I'll drive you home," Cordelia said. It was not phrased as a question. "You don't have to." "I know. Get your coat." Outside, rain had begun, the soft kind that turns streetlights into halos and makes the whole city look underwater. Cordelia's car was black, low, silent in the particular way that very expensive things are silent, and she drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, giving me time to fall apart quietly in the passenger seat, which I did, for exactly 4 blocks, silent tears that I hoped she couldn't see in the dark. "You don't have to pretend for my benefit," she said finally, not unkindly. "I imagine that was one of the worst nights of your life." "Top 3, I said, and the wet, cracked laugh that came out of me surprised us both. "For what it's worth," Cordelia said, eyes still on the rain-slicked road, "my brother has always wanted beautiful things. He was too weak to protect. It isn't new. I've watched him do smaller versions of this his whole life. I should have warned you before tonight. I didn't know you existed until an hour ago, or I would have." "He never mentioned me to you either, I guess," I said. "Match made in heaven." She almost smiled. Almost. "I don't do this, generally," she said. "Rescue women from dinners. Involve myself in Julian's, whatever this was. I run hotels. I fire people for a living. I am, by every reasonable account, not a warm person. You gave me your brother's chair and told your mother she'd get used to it," I said. "That's warmer than most people manage in a year." She was quiet for a moment, the wipers ticking rhythm against the glass. "I have a rule," she said eventually. "I don't apologize for things I'm not sorry for. I'm not sorry I embarrassed him. I'm sorry it took me that long to walk into the room." She pulled up outside my apartment building, a modest walk-up above a laundromat, nothing like the marble and crystal she'd come from, and did not comment on the difference, did not let anything cross her face that suggested she was cataloging it the way Beatrice would have. "Thank you," I said, hand on the door, "for the chair." "Don't thank me for common decency," Cordelia said. "It sets the bar too low for the rest of us." She hesitated, and for the first time all night I saw something almost uncertain cross her face. "Are you going to be all right, Noelle Carter?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Ask me next week." "I will," she said, and I believed, somehow, that she meant it. I did not fall in love with her that night. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a prettier story if I had some instant thunderclap of recognition in the rain. What I felt driving away from that house was not romance. It was humiliation, and grief for a year of my life spent loving a man who would trade me for his mother's approval, and a confusing, unwelcome gratitude toward his sister that I didn't know what to do with. The next morning I went to the bakery before dawn, the way I always did, And I put my hands in dough because dough doesn't lie to you, doesn't call you an agency hire, doesn't disappear its hand from your back the second its mother frowns. Amara found me there at 5 a.m., flour to my elbows, eyes swollen. "Okay," she said, setting down her bag, taking one look at my face. "Who do I need to fight?" I told her everything, in pieces, between the rhythm of kneading. She swore at Julian with an inventiveness that made me laugh despite myself, and then went quiet at the part about Cordelia. "The scary sister gave you his chair," she repeated. "She said I deserved it more than he did." "Noelle." Amara wiped her hands on her apron, looked at me hard. "That's not nothing. It's not anything either. She felt sorry for me." "You said her voice didn't sound sorry. You said it sounded like she was angry on your behalf." Amara shrugged, going back to her own station. "Sorry and angry aren't the same thing. File that away." I tried not to file it away. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into work instead. A wedding order for 80, a new lavender honey tart Amara insisted would sell out. The slow business of building a life that didn't have Julian Whitlock's careful, cowardly love in it anymore. He called 4 times. I didn't answer. He sent a long text about pressure and family expectations, and how sorry he was, how he panicked, how his mother had always been difficult, and Cordelia had always made everything into a production, and I read it once and put my phone face down and did not cry, which felt like its own small victory. Then, on a Tuesday, an order came in for the bakery, 200 dessert boxes, custom branded, for a hotel charity gala. The hotel was a Whitlock property. The account note, when I called to confirm the order was real, and not some elaborate cruel joke, simply read, "Requested by C. Whitlock, Director of Operations." "She's throwing you business," Amara said, delighted, when I told her. "That's not an apology, that's a statement." I called the number on the account note, half expecting an assistant. Cordelia answered herself. "Miss Carter," she said, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of somewhere important behind her. Elevators, distant conversation, the hum of a building that never really slept. "I hope the order isn't presumptuous." "It's 200 dessert boxes, Cordelia. It's a little presumptuous." "I've tasted your work. Julian brought home a box of your salted caramel tarts once, months ago, before I knew whose hands made them. I remembered them longer than I remembered him bringing them." A pause. "Consider it a business decision, not a favor. My hotel needs a pastry partner for the gala season. You need the exposure. I don't do charity, Noelle. I do strategy." "That sounds like something you tell yourself to avoid saying thank you." The silence on the line stretched a beat too long to be nothing. "Perhaps," she said finally. "I'll have the contract sent over. Read it carefully. I mean that as respect, not warning." I read it carefully. It was, infuriatingly, an excellent contract. Fair rates, full creative control, a clause protecting my recipes as my own intellectual property that most first-time hotel deals never bothered to include. It was the contract of someone who had thought, specifically, about what I would need protected. Over the following weeks, small things kept happening. A referral from a Whitlock-adjacent event planner, a reservation held quietly at my bakery's counter for me, under a name that turned out, when I looked closer at the delivery slip, to belong to one of Julian's cousins, the kind of person who might have made trouble for me at that dinner, now somehow rerouted elsewhere before she could. A gossip item that had begun circulating about the maid Julian Whitlock brought to dinner simply stopped. The way certain stories stop when someone with real power quietly makes calls that never appear in writing. I found out about that last one from Amara, who'd heard it through the wedding industry grapevine. "She's protecting you," Amara said. "Like, actively. Behind the scenes. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. And I didn't know yet how I felt about it. I found out how I felt about it 3 weeks later, at the charity tasting event, where I was meant to present the dessert line for the gala. It was held in the Whitlock Flagship Hotel's private dining room, smaller than the mansion, warmer somehow, all soft gold light and dark wood, and Cordelia was there overseeing the whole evening with the crisp, unbothered authority of a woman who had built the place from the ground up. She found me in the small staging kitchen before the tasting began, tying my apron, hands slightly unsteady with nerves I refused to show anyone. "You didn't have to come check on the caterer," I said, trying for lightness. "I wanted to see your work in my space," she said. "There's a difference between wanting to and having to." "Is that also true of the gossip you made disappear? And the cousin you moved out of my bakery's path? And the contract you wrote to protect my recipes before I even asked?" Something in her face went still. "You noticed all of that." "I notice everything, Cordelia. It's part of the job. You learn to read a room when you've spent your whole life serving in one." I set down the piping bag, turned to face her fully, my pulse loud in my own ears. "I'm grateful. I am. But I need you to hear this, because I don't think anyone in your life has ever said it to you plainly. You cannot fix what happened to me by quietly managing my whole life from a distance. That's not rescue. That's just a different kind of control. A kinder one, maybe. But I spent a year being managed by a man who was ashamed of me, and I will not spend the next year being managed by a woman who feels guilty about her family." The silence that followed was long enough that I thought I'd ruined something, some fragile thing neither of us had named yet. "You're right," Cordelia said finally, quietly, and there was something raw underneath the composure, a crack I hadn't seen in her before. "I don't know how to help someone without taking over the helping. I've been solving my family's problems since I was 19 years old. Julian's messes, my father's business failures, my mother's need for everyone to look perfect at dinner. I learned that the only way to keep anyone safe was to control every variable myself. I didn't ask you what you wanted. I decided what you needed, and executed it, the way I execute everything." She looked at me, and for the first time her composure didn't feel like armor. It felt like exhaustion worn so long it had become a second skin. "I'm sorry. Truly. Not the kind of sorry I don't mean." "Thank you," I said, softer now. "That's all I wanted. Not for you to stop, just to ask first. To let me be a person you're choosing to help, not a problem you're managing." "Noted," she said, and there was the faintest ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Would you permit me then, purely as a request and not an executive decision, to taste what you've made tonight?" I handed her a small tart, the lavender honey one Amara had insisted would sell, thin pastry, whipped mascarpone, a single candied violet on top. Cordelia took it and ate it, and went very still in a way that had nothing to do with professional assessment. "My grandmother made something like this," she said quietly, after a long moment. "Before she died, before the hotels, before any of it, when we still lived in the small house behind my father's first restaurant. She used dried lavender from the garden. I haven't tasted anything like it in 25 years. She looked at the tart, then at me, something unguarded moving across her face. "Where did you learn to make this?" "My mother," I said. "She cleaned houses for a living. She used to bring home the flowers people threw out after parties, dry them on the windowsill. She said beautiful things shouldn't be wasted, just because rich people were done looking at them." Cordelia didn't say anything for a moment. When she did, her voice had gone rougher than I'd heard it. "I wanted to be a chef, once, before my father decided I was better suited to running the numbers than running a kitchen. I gave it up so quietly I almost forgot I'd wanted it at all." "You could still want it," I said. "I don't know how anymore." She set the empty tart wrapper down with unusual care, like it mattered more than it should. "Thank you, Noelle, for the tart. And for the rest of it, the honesty." The gala that followed was a triumph. My desserts disappeared off the tasting tables within the first hour, and 3 separate wedding planners cornered me for cards. But what I remember most from that night is not the professional victory. It's Cordelia finding me afterward on the hotel's rooftop herb garden, where I'd escaped for 5 minutes of quiet among the rosemary and thyme she apparently maintained herself, in defiance of every assumption I'd made about her having no time for anything soft. "You grow herbs," I said, surprised, running a hand along a rosemary bush silvered with the last of the evening light. "I need one thing in this building that isn't about profit margins," she said, coming to stand beside me at the railing, the city glittering below us, rain from earlier in the week still slicking the streets silver. Julian used to tease me for it, said it was strange for the coldest Whitlock to keep a garden. "You're not cold," I said. You're just tired of everyone mistaking your competence for a lack of feeling." She turned to look at me then, and the distance between us had somehow, without either of us moving, become very small. "You keep seeing things about me no one else bothers to look for. You keep doing the same for me," I said. "It's a little disorienting, being seen. I'm still getting used to it." She reached out, slowly, giving me every chance to step back, which I didn't, and brushed a strand of hair from my face, her fingers barely grazing my cheek, and the air between us went taut and electric and terrifying. "I should go back down," she said, not moving. "You should," I agreed, not moving either. Neither of us went anywhere for a long moment, the rosemary sharp in the air, the whole glittering city spread out below like something neither of us had been given permission to want. Then she stepped back, composed herself, and offered me her arm like the evening required a return to formality neither of us quite felt. "Soon," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Not tonight, but soon, Noel Carter. I am going to want to say something to you that I don't think either of us is ready to hear yet." "I'll be here," I said. "Ask me next week, remember?" The ghost of her smile came back, fuller this time. "I remember everything you say. It's becoming a problem." There was an evening, not long after the rooftop, when Cordelia invited me to sit in on part of a Whitlock board meeting. Not to speak, just to observe the gala budget discussion, since my bakery's contract was on the agenda. I had never sat in a room like that from the inside of the table, rather than the outer edge of it, and it was strange, disorienting, to watch Cordelia become someone slightly different in that context. Sharper, faster, utterly unsentimental, dismantling a board member's objection to the expanded dessert budget with 3 cool sentences that left the man visibly rearranging his thoughts. 15% above last year's dessert allocation is not a rounding error, Cordelia, the man said, a distant cousin of some kind, gray at the temples, clearly used to being agreed with. Perhaps we should revisit whether a local bakery is the right partner for an event of this caliber. The local bakery in question, Cordelia said without raising her voice, sold out within the first hour at the Winter Gala and generated more press coverage for this hotel than the ice sculptures did. I'd be happy to walk you through the exact revenue figures if you'd like, or you can trust the numbers already in front of you. Either way, the partnership stands. I watched the man fold, the way everyone in that family seemed to fold in front of her, and felt a small, fierce pride that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with simply being on the right side of her attention for once. Afterward, walking me out, she seemed almost embarrassed by how easily I'd watched her win. "You're terrifying in there," I told her. "I have to be," she said. "It's the only language half of them respect." "You don't have to be terrifying with me." "I know," she said, quiet again, the boardroom sharpness folding away like a coat she could take off only for certain people. "That's rather the point of you, I'm starting to realize." There was a late-night bakery crisis a few weeks after that. Not the oven this time, but a walk-in refrigeration unit that failed silently overnight before a 500-piece order for a corporate breakfast, and I discovered it at 4 a.m, standing in a puddle of melted ganache with Amara cursing beside me, and 40 pounds of ruined chocolate work between us, and a deadline in 6 hours. I did not call Cordelia. I want to be clear about that, because it mattered to me, after everything, to prove to myself that I could survive a crisis without leaning on her resources first. Amara and I worked the phones ourselves, found an emergency supplier 3 towns over, drove through empty pre-dawn streets with the car heater blasting, and radio off because neither of us could spare the concentration for music, and rebuilt what we could from what remained. Cordelia found out anyway. Desmond, of all people, had mentioned it to a hotel supplier who mentioned it to someone else. The way information always traveled faster than either of us wanted in that world, and she arrived at the bakery just as dawn broke, not with a solution already assembled, but with 2 coffees and a question. "What do you need?" she said, simply, standing in the doorway in yesterday's clothes, clearly having left her apartment the moment she heard. "We've got it handled," I said, exhausted, chocolate on my sleeve, more proud than I had energy to properly express. "We didn't need rescuing." "I can see that." She looked around at the recovered order, at Amara asleep sitting upright against the flour sacks, at the visible evidence of two women who had solved their own crisis in the dark. Something in her face was unmistakably admiration. I didn't come to rescue you. I came because I wanted to see you, and I brought coffee because I assumed, correctly, that you'd forgotten to eat. She set the cups down. Was that permitted? That's permitted, I said, and let myself lean into her for the first time all night, exhaustion finally allowed to show. That's more than permitted. It was around this time that Julian tried once more, with more calculation and less remorse than his sidewalk apology. He arranged, through a mutual industry acquaintance, to be seated at the same charity luncheon I was catering, and cornered me near the coat check before the event began, dressed carefully, rehearsed carefully. I've been in therapy, he said, without preamble. I understand now what I did. I understand the pattern. Our mother, the way she raised us to think love was conditional on performance. I'm not the man I was that night. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it, in the distant, unresentful way you mean well for a stranger. I hope the work is real. Cordelia can't give you what I could, he pressed on, undeterred by my calm. She'll always choose the company first. She's spent her whole life proving she doesn't need anyone. You'll spend years trying to get past that armor, Noelle, and one day you'll realize it was never coming off. You might be surprised, I said. How much armor comes off for someone willing to ask, instead of assume? I straightened the strap of my bag, meeting his eyes without anger, only a kind of tired clarity. Julian, I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for. But I don't think it's me, and I don't think it ever really was. I think you wanted someone who made you feel comfortable, and you're only now discovering that comfort and love aren't the same thing. I left him standing near the coat check, and did not think of him again with anything sharper than mild, distant compassion. Julian found me a week later, waiting outside my bakery after close, looking rumpled in a way he'd clearly practiced for effect. Noelle, please, 5 minutes. I gave him 3, standing on the sidewalk with my keys still in hand. I panicked, he said, the same words he'd texted, now performed live with the addition of visible remorse. My mother is impossible. You know how she is. I should have told you that before. And I froze, and it was the worst mistake of my life, and I've thought about nothing else for weeks. She's been circling you, hasn't she? Sending you business, showing up at your events. That's not kindness, Noelle. That's my sister, doing what she always does, taking over anything I touch because she can't stand for me to have something good without her fingerprints on it. Julian, I said, tired in a way that went bone deep. Your sister walked into a room, told the truth in front of your entire family, and gave me the chair you took from me. You stood in a doorway and watched it happen, because you didn't have the courage to do it yourself. I don't need you to explain her motives to me. I've had a much clearer view of both of you than you seem to realize. So that's it? You're just you and Cordelia now? My own sister? There is no you and Cordelia. Not yet. And it's none of your business if there ever is. But I want you to hear this clearly, because I don't think you ever really have. The problem was never that you were embarrassed by pressure. Every person alive has felt pressure. The problem is that, when it mattered, you decided it was easier to erase me than to defend me. That's not panic, Julian. Panic is a single bad moment. What you did was a choice, dressed up as an accident. He didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected him to. I loved you, he said instead, quieter now, some of the performance draining out of him. I know, I said, and I found, standing there, that it was true, and that it no longer hurt the way I'd expected it to. I loved you too. But love that hides in a family dinner isn't love I can build anything on. I hope you figure out, someday, what it costs you to keep choosing approval over people. I left him on the sidewalk and did not look back, and something in my chest that had been clenched for weeks finally, quietly, let go. The weeks that followed moved differently after that. Cordelia and I began seeing each other in the small, unglamorous ways that end up mattering more than grand gestures. She learned, without being told, that I take my tea black with too much honey. I learned that she works barefoot in her office after midnight when no one's watching, that the fiercest woman in 3 hotel boardrooms keeps a battered paperback of poetry in her desk drawer that she pretends belongs to someone else. I came to her office once late with a crisis. An oven had died the night before a huge order, and Amara and I were in a full-blown panic. And Cordelia arrived at my bakery at 11 at night in jeans I hadn't known she owned, and personally called a restaurant supplier she knew to have an oven delivered and installed before 6 a.m., and then stayed to help box 400 cookies with hands that had clearly never boxed a cookie in their life, laughing. "You're terrible at this," I told her, watching her mangle a bow for the 3rd time. "I run a hotel empire," she said, deeply offended, "not a craft store." "Your empire could learn something from a craft store." She threw a piece of ribbon at me. I caught it, laughing. Flour on both our hands, 4 in the morning, and something between us that had been building for weeks finally, quietly, arrived at its inevitable conclusion. "Noelle," she said, and her voice had lost all its careful control. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say all of it before you respond, because if I stop partway through, I don't think I'll finish it." I nodded, wiping my hands, giving her my full attention. "I have not stopped thinking about the moment you sat in my brother's chair and did not break," she said. "I've watched a great many people fold under far less pressure than what my family put you through that night. And you sat down, and you ate, and you held your head like it belonged to someone who knew her own worth, even when the whole room had just tried to convince you otherwise. I don't know how to be soft, Noelle. I've spent so many years being the family's blade that I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. But you make me want to remember. You make me want to grow rosemary and taste desserts and stay up past midnight boxing cookies badly, instead of closing a merger. I think I am, against every rule I've made for myself, in love with you." The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the new oven and the rain that had started again against the window. "I've been waiting for you to say something," I admitted, "since the rooftop. I told you it would take time. You said soon." "I was managing expectations," she said, and I laughed, and she reached for me, slowly, the same careful permission she always gave me, hands finding my waist, flour and all, and I closed the last of the distance myself, because I wanted her to know I wasn't being rescued. I was choosing. The kiss was not what I expected from a woman built like armor. It was careful first, testing, and then it wasn't careful at all, her hand sliding to the back of my neck, mine fisting in the front of her shirt, the particular desperate hunger of 2 people who had spent weeks pretending not to want this. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, foreheads together, she laughed. That same rare, unguarded sound. "I have wanted to do that since the rooftop garden," she admitted. "I have wanted you to do that since you told your mother she'd get used to it." We did not rush past that point. There were nights after, at my apartment, where we lay tangled together on my too small couch doing nothing more than talking until dawn, her fingers tracing slow patterns against my palm, my head on her shoulder, both of us learning the other's silences as intimately as the other's words. There were nights we came close to more, her hands trembling slightly at my waist, her mouth at my throat, and I would feel the question in her stillness. "Is this all right? Tell me if it isn't." And once, only once, I asked her to stop. Not because I didn't want her, but because some old wound from Julian's careless hands still needed time to heal before I gave myself fully to someone new. She stopped instantly, held me instead, and told me, low against my hair, that she would wait as long as it took, not out of patience, but because I was worth waiting for. There was an afternoon, weeks before any of that public reckoning, when I arrived at the hotel to finalize gala logistics, and found myself alone with Cordelia, in the private executive elevator, the one that ran express from the lobby to the top-floor offices without stopping, mirrored on every side, so that there was nowhere for either of us to look except at each other, or at ourselves looking at each other. "This is a very small space," I said, mostly to fill the silence, acutely aware of her standing close enough that I could smell the clean, cold scent of her perfume, something like rain and cedar. "It's the fastest way up," she said, but she wasn't looking at the floor numbers ticking past. She was looking at me, the same unhurried, assessing look from that first dinner, except now it had nothing to do with judgment, and everything to do with wanting. Cordelia. Yes. We have a meeting in 4 minutes. We do. She did not move away. If anything, the small space seemed to shrink further, her hand coming to rest lightly against the mirrored wall beside my head, not trapping me, simply framing the moment, giving me every chance to duck beneath her arm and step back if I wanted to. I did not want to. I keep thinking about the rooftop, she admitted, low, almost private, as though the mirrors themselves might overhear and report back to the board. About the version of that night where I didn't stop myself. You're allowed to stop stopping yourself, I said. The elevator chimed softly for our floor, and neither of us moved for it. She kissed me then, not the desperate, hungry kiss of the bakery kitchen weeks later, but something slower, an exploration, her hand finally sliding from the mirrored wall to my jaw, tilting my face up to hers with a tenderness that undid something tightly wound in my chest that had been braced, without my realizing it, since the night Julian's hand slipped from my back. When the doors opened onto the top floor, an assistant stood waiting, and we broke apart, breathless, composed within half a second in the particular way people who work in glass buildings learn to be, and walked into the meeting exactly on time, exactly as if nothing at all had happened, though I spent the entire hour unable to look at her without warmth climbing up my throat. That was reckless, I told her afterward, delighted, despite myself. I am occasionally capable of recklessness, she said. Rarely. You seem to bring it out. There were other small, tender collisions in the weeks that followed, the kind that build a relationship in the spaces between its grand moments. There was a Sunday when I found her, unannounced at her own apartment, barefoot on her kitchen floor at 11 in the morning, hair loose instead of pinned, wearing an old university sweatshirt I hadn't known she owned, looking, for the first time since I'd met her, entirely unguarded, entirely young. You're not allowed to see me like this, she said, half laughing, half serious, reaching for a robe. Too late, I said, and refused to let her cover it up, because the sight of Cordelia Whitlock barefoot and soft on a lazy Sunday felt like a gift no board meeting had ever been able to give me. I like this version of you. I like all the versions, but I especially like this one. Nobody likes this version, she said. This version doesn't run anything. This version burns toast. This version is my favorite, I said, and meant it so plainly that she went quiet, something moving behind her eyes that looked almost like disbelief that she could be wanted for the parts of herself she'd spent a lifetime hiding. Beatrice, predictably, did not take the news well when it reached her, and it reached her fast, the way all Whitlock business eventually did. She came to my bakery herself, unannounced, in a coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and sat stiffly at one of my small cafe tables while I finished a custom order, refusing the tea I offered out of what I suspected was simple distaste for anything I might have touched. I'll be direct, she said. Whatever this is between you and my daughter, it needs to end. Cordelia has a reputation to protect. The company has shareholders who expect a certain image. A relationship with, she gestured, vaguely, at the bakery, at me, at the whole modest architecture of my life. Someone of your background is not something the board will look kindly on. You mean someone you once called the Maid, I said, not unkindly, just plainly. Beatrice's mouth thinned. I would be willing to help you relocate, somewhere with better opportunities. A generous settlement, discreetly arranged, so that this, infatuation, doesn't become a lasting complication for my family. I set down my piping bag. Mrs. Whitlock, I turned down your son when he offered me shame disguised as love. I'm not interested in your money disguised as help either. Your daughter isn't a company asset you get to protect from bad press. She's a grown woman who chose me with her eyes open, and if the board doesn't like it, I'd suggest the board examine why a woman's happiness is considered a liability in the first place. She left without finishing her sentence, and I found out 3 days later, through Amara's grapevine, that Cordelia had heard about the visit and had a conversation with her mother so quiet and so final that Beatrice did not attempt a second one. The formal test came at the winter gala, the same category of event as the dinner where it all began, though this one was held in the hotel's grand ballroom rather than the mansion, chandeliers instead of family portraits. 300 guests instead of 6. I attended not as staff, not smuggled in through a side door, but as Cordelia's date. In a deep blue gown, Amara had helped me choose specifically because it made me feel like I took up exactly as much space as I deserved. Julian was there. Beatrice was there. Cool and correct in public, even if privately defeated. And there was a moment, near the dessert course. My dessert course. The one my bakery had been contracted to provide for the entire gala season, where Julian, 3 drinks in and emboldened by them, cornered me near the ice sculpture, with the particular meanness of a man trying to reclaim territory he'd already lost. "Everyone's talking about you," he said. "The maid who worked her way up to my sister's bed. Quite the promotion." The room around us did not go silent the way it had that first night, because this time, I did not let the silence do the work for me. "I didn't work my way up anywhere, Julian," I said, clearly, loud enough for the small cluster of nearby guests to hear. "I stood in your family's dining room while you called me hired help to protect your own comfort, and your sister was the only person brave enough to tell the truth in that room. I built my own bakery with my own hands before either of you knew my name, and I'm dating your sister because she is honest with me in a way you never managed to be. If people are talking, let them talk about that." Cordelia arrived at my side then, not to speak for me. She had learned that lesson well, but simply to stand beside me, her hand finding mine in a way that was visible to the whole room, a public claiming that cost her nothing to give and meant everything to receive. "Is there a problem here?" she asked her brother, mild as still water, though something dangerous moved beneath it. "No," Julian said, deflating instantly, the way he always had in the face of his sister's calm. "No problem." "Good," Cordelia said, "because Noelle doesn't need me to fight her battles. I believe she's just demonstrated that quite thoroughly." She looked at me, something proud and warm passing between us that had nothing to do with the room full of watching strangers, though I'll admit I do enjoy watching. There was one more test before the world settled into something quieter, gentler, ours. A journalist covering the hospitality industry, hunting for a scandal to dress up as a profile piece, reached out to Amara first, fishing for quotes about the pastry chef who climbed from staff to society, a phrase clearly designed to reduce everything that had happened to me into a punchline about class and opportunism. Amara, predictably, told the woman exactly what she could do with her framing, but the request rattled me more than I wanted to admit, old fears rising up about being reduced again to a story other people got to tell about me. I mentioned it to Cordelia that night, half expecting her to offer to make a call, to handle it the way she'd once handled everything, quietly, from a distance, without asking me first. She didn't. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked instead, and the question itself, so simple, felt like its own kind of gift. "I want to talk to her myself," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty of it. Not to defend myself, just to tell the truth on my own terms, for once, instead of having it decided in a dining room by someone else's lie. "Then that's what we'll do," Cordelia said. "I'll be there if you want me there. I'll stay out of it if you don't." I asked her to come, not because I needed defending, but because I wanted her beside me when the story of that first dinner was finally told the way it had actually happened. The interview ran 2 weeks later, and instead of the cruel, tabloid framing the journalist had originally chased, it became something else entirely, a piece about dignity, about the quiet architecture of humiliation, built into rooms like the Whitlock dining hall, about a pastry chef who had refused to disappear, and a woman the industry called cold who had, in the end, chosen honesty over image. Beatrice, I heard secondhand, was furious about the piece for exactly 1 week before several of her own society friends began quoting it to her approvingly at lunch, at which point her fury quietly, predictably, evaporated. Months passed after that the way good months do, quickly, warmly, full of the unremarkable texture of an ordinary happy life. My bakery, boosted by the hotel partnership and by its own reputation, expanded into a second location, this one co-owned on paper by both Carter and Whitlock names, though I insisted, and Cordelia readily agreed, that the terms were mine, the recipes were mine, the name above the door was mine. Cordelia, in turn, began spending Tuesday evenings in my kitchen, learning knife skills with the patience of a woman relearning a childhood dream, one clumsy cut at a time, and started, quietly, without announcing it to the board, taking one afternoon a week entirely for herself, gardening on the rooftop, reading the poetry she no longer hid in a drawer. On a Tuesday evening in early spring, almost a year to the day after that first disastrous dinner, Cordelia set a small table for two in her apartment. Not the mansion, not the hotel's grand dining room, just a modest table by a window, overlooking the same city we'd once looked at together from a rooftop garden. Candles instead of chandeliers, one dish instead of 6 courses, a bottle of wine and a dessert I recognized instantly as her attempt, clumsy and heartfelt, at my grandmother's lavender tart. "You made this?" I asked, delighted, examining the slightly uneven crust. "Badly," she admitted, "but I made it." She pulled out my chair the way she had that first terrible night, an echo now transformed into something entirely new. Not rescue, not recognition of a wrong she needed to right, just simple, ordinary devotion. I sat, and then, smiling, stood again and walked around the small table to pull out her chair in return. She looked at me, surprised, something soft breaking open across her face. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I want to. There's a difference. You taught me that." She sat, and I sat across from her, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all, just held each other's gaze across a small table in a modest apartment that had nothing to prove to anyone. "A year ago," I said finally, "I stood beside a table like this one, and I thought I was being introduced to the family I was going to spend my life with. I was wrong about the family. I wasn't wrong about the life." "I love you," Cordelia said, simply. The words easier now than they'd ever been, that first trembling night in my bakery kitchen. Not as an apology for my family, not as a correction to my brother's cowardice, just because you are the first person who ever asked whether I was tired, and meant it, and stayed to hear the answer. "I love you too," I said, "and for the record, I was never the maid, but I'll gladly be the woman who pulls out your chair every night for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." "Every night," she agreed, reaching across the small table for my hand. "I'll hold you to that." Outside, the city glittered the way it always did, indifferent to us, the way cities are. Inside, at a table set for two, with badly made lavender tart between us and no family watching to approve or condemn, I finally understood what it felt like to be chosen. Not seated, not rescued, not managed into safety, but chosen, plainly, in the light, by someone who had learned, slowly and honestly, how to make room.